although I've very much enjoyed the time I've spent over the last couple of months with the concertos of Johann Sebastian Bach, I have to confess that I found my work on the triple concerto exhausting, probably owing largely to unrelated circumstances, and need to step back for a while from such thoroughgoing, unrelenting polyphony. So it is that I'm going to spend a little time with Bach's slightly older contemporary, Georg Philipp Telemann, who was far more famous in his time than Bach and who held considerably better positions. The reason for that is obvious. Telemann always wrote in a gracious, easily accessible style, while Bach's musical approach mostly aimed at something loftier and more cerebral. As a result, Telemann's dance music really does sound like music for dancing, while Bach's dance music often strikes me as stilted. This is the main reason I haven't been overly tempted to delve into Bach's extant orchestral suites, even though they include many treasures. It's been said that Telemann wrote for an audience of flesh and blood human beings, while the music of Bach was mostly intended for God's ears. Telemann was extraordinarily prolific, perhaps the most prolific composer in history, which is no doubt partially due to his having outlived Bach by a considerable stretch of years, but also because so much of Bach's music has been lost. Of course, the prolific does sometimes shade off into the hastily produced, and I do know many serious musicians who regard Telemann's music as somewhat glib. I wouldn't exactly put it that way, but I will note that Telemann's concertos do not strike me as having cost the composer nearly as much time in the writing as it must have taken Bach to work out all that counterpoint. Telemann's concertos are also much easier to parse formally than Bach's, even though, harmonically speaking, there are often surprises there that are not encountered in Bach's music and that sometimes resist explanation in common practice terms. It's also true that, far more often than Bach, Telemann will venture into related key areas by means of a simple stepwise sequence, a passage transposed directly from C major to D major, for instance, without troubling himself with the kind of inferential modulation involving hinge chords, which describes Bach's usual method. My harmonic analysis will reflect this if you follow those. I'm going to begin by addressing a concerto that I seem to have loved all my life, since my mid-teens, in fact, when I made this serendipitous discovery. It is one of Telemann's most often played concertos, and the first, in fact, ever written for the viola. Telemann composed it in 1715, adopting the four-movement sonata di chiesa form, slow, fast, rather than the more usual three-movement form found in Bach. That form could be thought of as having an extra movement up front, sometimes serving as an introduction to the remaining fast, slow, fast pattern of movements. Overall, the music is more homophonic than polyphonic, and both slow movements afford opportunities for a solo cadenza, although in this wonderful live performance by Tomoe Badiarova and the Bremer Baroque Orchestra, you'll hear that opportunity seized only in the first movement. I have, incidentally, left intact a cadenza supplied by the editor for this edition, although Ms. Badiarova has composed her own, as is the more usual case. The concerto's four movements all honor the ritornello principle of alternating tutti and solo passages, but in the final movement, a binary form dance movement, there is another principle that was gradually emerging during the High Baroque and would culminate in the full-fledged sonata form approach taken by a later generation of composers. We've seen this sort of thing before in this series, in two of the Brandenburg concertos. As in both those cases, I have adopted the sonata form approach in my analysis, mostly to indicate the shape of things to come. In this final movement, as in both those other cases, the music is monothematic, which means that what I've identified as theme 2 is not a new theme, but rather a transposition and elaboration of theme 1. I hope this is a useful approach, and I hope you enjoy this wonderful music as much as I do.
you.